Good morning, everyone. Welcome very warmly indeed to this morning's session, which is, as the title on the screen, it really is about a balancing act, equity versus excellence. Before I invite our very distinguished panel to join us, perhaps I may just do a couple of words of introduction as to why WISE perhaps has decided, well, forgive me, I should introduce myself. I'm Valerie Hannon. I kind of resent being called a veteran WISE attendee. I'm very old, but there's no need to rub it in. I have been working with WISE for some years now. I had the privilege of writing the WISE book 3 years ago, which was called Learning a Living. And that book is up there because it's my latest, published last month, called Thrive, which is about different purposes for education systems. I'm based in London. I'm a director of the Innovation Unit, and I run an organisation called Global Education Leaders Partnership. So that's me. If you would like to Google me and find what I'm up to, please come and talk later. I've been asked to moderate this session. I'm delighted to do so. It's a subject about which I feel passionately. And as a couple of words of introduction, perhaps I might start by saying that if you think about analogies with other sectors, in policy terms, it used to be said that if it was your objective to get a car into the hands of every citizen, you'd end up with Skodas. But you would never get a Maserati in a system which concentrated on getting Skodas into the hands of everybody. And historically speaking, in terms of the evolution of mass education systems, initially around the West and in the global North at any rate, policies emerged which did favour the construction of excellence. Education was created for elites, and the focus was on how do we manage to obtain excellence in our systems of education. And as we've evolved, there's been a shift away from excellence to excellence for all. And the question now becomes, to what extent are these objectives in any kind of tension? And that's what we're hoping to explore today. You may feel it's a non-starter as a question, but clearly if you look across the world, in terms of socio-economic inequity, everywhere you look, socio-economic inequity is growing massively, and it's impossible for education to be immune to that. Nevertheless, if you look at the data from OECD's PISA, then you find, and Andreas Schleicher, I think, demonstrates this very clearly with a number of graphs, that there are some systems in which you can detach the socio-economic background and their disadvantage and poverty from the outcomes of the education system. So you may have seen his 2x2 diagram in which some systems are both very high performing on all the measures of OECD PISA's tests, and at the same time highly equitable in that they do not have a long tail of underachievement which is associated with the poverty of their populations. And the systems who manage to do that, you probably all know what they are, some Canadian provinces, Finland, of course, Australia. These are societies which are more equitable in themselves. And the question, I guess, becomes, does these outcomes inevitably reflect society itself? Or is it possible for less equal societies to manage to engineer more equitable educational outcomes? So by way of introduction, that's a few thoughts to leave you with. We are extremely privileged, in my view, to have a very distinguished panel, an all-woman panel, I'm proud to say, today, which is rather a departure for WISE. So may I invite the panel to come and join me on stage, and then I would introduce them one by one. Please welcome our panel. Thank you. So first on my left, and I think coming up now, is Dr. Yan Wong. Dr. Wong is from the Asia Pacific Economic Cooperation Organization, APEC, but simultaneously, I think all our panelists run several roles at the same time. If you want someone to run many roles, ask a woman, generally is the answer, I think. She's also senior specialist at the National Institute of Education Sciences in China. Yan has run so many research projects, too numerous, I think, to enumerate here, and published a large number of articles and research papers on issues of education policy and reform, and was also, I believe, consultant at the World Bank. To her left, we have Dr. Amel Kabul. extremely privileged today to have a live working, well, ex-politician, I should say. Well, there aren't many at Wise, but Amel was, for a time, Minister of Tourism in the Tunisian transition government. So she has direct experience of what it's like to be in the inner discussions of policy. Currently, she's a commissioner of International Commission on Financing Global Education Opportunity, of which I'm sure she'll say a great deal more. She has wide experience with senior roles in business and in consulting with BCG, Mercedes-Benz, a number of other organisations. And to fill up her spare time, she's also visiting professor at Duke Corporate Education on leadership, with a profound interest in developing tomorrow's leaders. So welcome. And by no means least, Dr. Karen Gallagher. Dr. Gallagher is Dean of Education at University of Southern California, Rosier School of Education. I think it's fair to say that Karen is one of the most innovative deans of education, working in the field of preparing leaders and teachers for new priorities and new contexts. Her own school pioneered innovative approaches to teacher and leadership development, particularly working with other US deans to adopt a data-driven approach, I think is fair. And again, not content with that, she has also led the initiative of the school to open 5 charter schools in the US. So here is our panel. Do welcome them again. Thank you very much for coming. So what I propose to do, first of all, I will say we're a fairly small select group, and I want to leave a lot of time for your interaction, your contributions, and your questions. But what I'd like to do with the opening part of the session is to give each panellist a little bit of time to make her own clear views without being interrogated by me or interrupted about the fundamental issue. So my starting question to you, Jan, if you'd like to begin, is do you believe that excellence and equity in education are actually in tension? Is that your starting view from your deep experience of research and looking at data systems both in China and across the world? And if you do think there is some tension in there, from your perspective, how can they be reconciled? How are they being reconciled?
Okay, so before I share my thinking about these 2 questions, a few words about myself. As mentioned by Valerie, I'm a researcher at National Institute of Education Science. It's a research institution affiliated with the Ministry of Education of China. And also I'm responsible for international exchange and cooperation. Another hat I'm wearing over the past 3 years and now is APAC Education Network Coordinator. So as you know, APAC is a multilateral economic collaborative platform, and Education Network is established in 1992 by the ministers of the 21 economies. This is created as the platform for 21 economies to discuss, to share knowledge, experience, and also to do collaborations on the common issues and common challenges in this region. So representatives or focal points from these 21 economies, we meet twice a year to share our knowledge and information, and also to discuss our collaborative projects, and also to discuss frameworks and strategies and action plans, etc. So WISE has been partnered with APAC for over a year or 2, I cannot count accurately. So representatives of WISE has participated in our APAC meetings and workshops, and we believe that this kind of partnership can create synergy that benefits work both. So to answer your question, the tension between the equity and excellence. So this is a very difficult question, and my answer would be yes and no. Why? So I believe that equity, if I can give a personal definition, is a kind of situation or level in which everyone is enabled or empowered to achieve excellence as she or he could and would. That's equity. So equity is everyone is enabled or empowered to achieve excellence as he or she would and could. So in that sense, equity and excellence is one thing. So excellence to me is a relative concept and can shift over space and over time. So it's easy to achieve equity? No, inequity is almost a universal issue in almost all the countries in the world. And it's easy to achieve excellence? No, even people as excellent as you are who are sitting in this conference room, I believe that you and we once failed somewhere in our life on something, and we could also screw things up and frustrated and then start all over again. For excellent level and for all excellent people and institutions, it occurs similar way. So both equity and excellence, in that sense, I believe, are time-wise and space-wise concepts and is relative. So to reach excellence, one either at personal level, institutional level, or at the country level has to get started, reach medium level, and then up to the excellence. So taking into the variety of the education, culture, and economy in all the countries, many countries in the world, equity and excellence are a common pursuit with either ambitious or humble goals, yet could not be reached by a single standard benchmark for everybody and for every nation. So both equity and excellence are not forcing upon any single criteria upon all, but is to allow and enable everyone to fully release their potentiality at certain states and in certain circumstances. So that's just some basic ideas about equity versus excellence. And then talking about China, because I'm from China. So now Chinese government is initiating some major reforms, education reforms relating to equity and excellence. As you may have known that we have just had the 19th National Party Congress. And after this Congress, we'll launch some major education reforms. As mentioned by our Minister of Education at the recent press conference, so there will be three main things for the government to do. The first is relating to early childhood or primary education, as research has shown that one cannot achieve excellence without start early and start well. So the first focus of the reform is pre-primary education. So the goal is by 2020, the gross enrollment rate to pre-primary education in China would reach 85%. The figure of the gross enrollment rate to the pre-primary education in 2015 is 75%. And the second is relating to the compulsory education. In China, compulsory education means the education, primary education, that's a 6-year primary education plus 3-year lower secondary education. So we have achieved the universal access to compulsory or compulsory education, but now we still have the problem of the dropping out or the incomplete the students who cannot complete the lower compulsory education for various reasons. Nowadays, actually, I think more because of the motivation rather than because of the economic reasons. In particular, is this is not scientific finding, but because in China's context, like in many places in the world, people have more and more pathways to earn a living and even to achieve success rather than following the traditional education path. So now the enrollment rates, anyhow, in particular, is an issue in minority, remote, and poverty-stricken areas. So the goal of the government is to increase the retention rates in those areas from 93.4% to 95%. Although this sounds to be a slight increase, but taking into account the large number of population that involves many children. And the third goal is reform on the college entrance examination. Well, in China, as in many Asian countries, our students work very hard to pass the test and to succeed the test up to the college entrance examination. That so far to many people are still the most significant, if not only way for upward social mobility. They get into university and then they get a degree and get a decent job and earn a good living. In spite of all the advocacy or policies that call for 21st century competencies, in the classrooms, teaching to the test happened. happens, and also the students, they learn the knowledge that's tested in the all kinds of the tests up to the college entrance examination. So this reform focus on the changing the content and also form of organizing the college entrance examination to involve more competence-based evaluation and assessment in this critical examination. So that's about China. 3 major reforms relating to both equity and excellence. And then it's the regional level, because I work for APAC on part-time basis. So I would like to share with you some statistics. This is some basic that could reflect the situation in equity in this region. And among 20 to 24-year-olds in 101 low and middle income countries, the poorest have on average 5 years of fewer schooling than the richest. The gap is 2.6 years between urban and rural dwellers, and 1.1 year between women and men. We'll talk about gender parity later on. And estimated adult literacy was nearly 95% in 2012 in East Asia and the Pacific region alone, equivalent to 88 million people lacking basic skills, of whom 70% were adult women. So that's really a serious issue. And moreover, that percentage has not been changed since 2000. So that's almost 10 years, more than 10 years. And then at APAC level, our solution to these challenges is we created something called APAC Education Strategy 2016 to 2030, focusing on the 3 pillars: competencies, innovation, and employability. So this document is kind of like a education plan or strategy jointly developed by APAC member economists and also endorsed by our education ministers and APAC leaders in 2016, last year. So they focus on the competencies, innovation, and employability because we believe that education problems are not rooted in education field alone, rather in vast social and economic context, and also by improving education performance alone, that is mostly test scores, could not solve those problems and achieve our goals. And with this action plan also proposed 9 priority areas for member economies to take joint actions. So then following up this action plan this year, also by the joint efforts, we have developed an action plan of the APAC education strategy. This was if you have read the news about the APAC leaders meeting last week at Da Nang, Vietnam, it was endorsed by the APAC senior officials and also was acknowledged by the APAC ministers. They welcome this action plan to guide our work in APAC region, focusing on the competencies, innovation, and employability. So I won't name or number those priority actions one by one, but just in short, one thing is we believe that we need a vision, that's vision up to 2030, inclusive and quality education. Second is we have to have our strategy, tools and instruments, and the approaches and strategies, and also we have to take joint actions. In particular, we have developed this common action plan that suggested a number of the actions, tools and instruments for the economists to apply, but we leave the discretion for them to choose which actions they would like to take or not. And what we're going to do is I would welcome you to join us on this initiative. Either you are from APAC member economies or not, being the member, a participant of the member economy or as an expert later on, is we have suggested 9 targets and 30 measurable and achievable indicators. Well, assumedly, that what we're going to do is we'll follow up with developing the templates and the instructions for the monitoring and the reporting of the education progress in this region, starting with some technical meeting and then the pilot and then the monitoring and the reporting process next year. Well, it's the first time we do it in the Asia-Pacific region. It's very challenging, but we believe that's what we have done with our strategy and action plan. We can do it. So finally, to answer the question about reconciliation, that's just some personal observation. At personal level, I believe reconcile. Only when every child they have the stress for learning, yet not tortured by the stress, but could turn the stress to motivation for learning, we can achieve equity and access. Likewise, everyone can be dedicated to learn, yet be flexible and resilient, and could navigate themselves through the rapid changes in society. And then everyone can enjoy learning, but be disciplined. Either be disciplined by the norms and disciplines in the schools and the society. Also, the discipline could persist in spite of whatever challenges or hardships when they can overcome. And then at the national level, the governments could recognize the vital importance of continue to work for quality and equitable education to enable people of all ages to meet the challenges of rapid changes in today's world. This is a citation from the APEC Economic Leaders Declaration. We tried very hard to add a sentence on education to be put into the APEC Economic Leaders Declaration. So I would like to echo someone, I think it's a speaker at the plenary session, that education to us is indeed the most important thing on this planet. But many people, even politicians, probably they don't think so. So it should be our responsibility to convince everybody, especially those politicians and policymakers, that education should be the first priority. And then the government could make policies and also take actions to support those disadvantaged regions and people by making interventions whenever there is a need. But in the meanwhile, the government could allow room or autonomy for local authorities to develop their own scheme or plan or policies suitable to local circumstances, so that have the plan, like the plan even for each school and the pathways for each child to follow that could suit themselves. So I believe this kind of reconciliation can help everybody and also every country to achieve the excellence and equity. Thank you.
Yeah, and thank you very much indeed. And thank you in particular for introducing the idea and pointing out that these concepts are relative, highly contextual in a sense, and often bounded by history. So you will have noticed, colleagues, that we have in our panel people representing very diverse parts of the world, from China and the Asia Pacific. We're just about to hear from Amel from the perspective of the Middle East and North Africa, but also with a transnational view in terms of her own approach as a commissioner, and also from the global north and North America specifically. So very different historical backgrounds to formulating policies. And I think it's fair to say that in the case of China, access has been the key issue, both for driving excellence, but critically, of course, for equity. So until that access, that universal access, is genuinely achieved in the way that the reforms that you described are driving towards, then equity is still a dream. But there are other issues, I think, that, Amel, you are going to think about and describe to us as you address these questions. Please take the floor.
So, as you said, I mean, you're one of the few who tells the whole title for the commission, which is amazing. It was so long, it was like then shortened to the Education Commission. And if the slide will come at some point, I think you will see the learning generation report. So 2 years ago, Gordon Bryan, and I was very honored to be invited by him and 26 other leaders to find out how big is this learning crisis and what we can do about it. And I can say I'm really happy because this morning's video and what the moderator said, there were lots of numbers that come from this report. So kind of the advocacy worked. And I think my colleague who's, previous education minister of South Korea, he said, now we have a Bible, I mean, whatever you said, but for education. And as you can see, the World Bank this year, they made the report about learning. So I think there is a unique moment in history today for education, and there is a big momentum. And everyone knows that yes, there is access issues all over the world, but basically there are too many children who go to school and don't learn. And this worries me personally very deeply, because if children go to school and don't learn, it devalues education and it devalues spending in education, so that government, political parties, and everyone else can say, why should we spend so much? Because kids are not learning and they're not getting the skills and they're not getting the jobs. Maybe we should skip education completely or don't invest it because of the wrong thing. So actually not having excellence will, I think, kill the whole system. So, and I'm not going to bore you with too many details of the learning generation. You can access it. But one important thing we did is to contextualize the answer. So the number half of the world children comes from that study. Half of the world children by 2030, is just 13 years from now, are going to be failing to learn. And what we did, after being totally depressed about hearing this, is to say, can we do anything about this? Or we all shall hide somewhere and just cry. And we found out, and this is the amazing thing, we can do something about it. And this is really amazing. And what we did is we divided countries by income level: low income, middle income, high income. And what we found out is if every country moves as fast as the fastest improver within their income level, that within just one human generation, within one generation, we can have every child in school and learning. And this is, you know, for my country, Tunisia, for example, not telling Tunisia do it the same way as Finland or Singapore, totally different context, totally different means, but we say, look at Vietnam, for example, you know, who spends similar amounts in GDP per capita for education, but achieves high results. So, and I would like to share one story, which for me, I love this example because it shows equity versus excellence, but it shows also how to innovate education, because education is probably the least transformed, the least reformed institution in the world. I think if doctors still worked like 100 years ago, I don't know how many of us will be still alive without antibiotics, without whatever. It's probably killed you more to go to the doctor than healed you 100 years ago. And I think too many classrooms, too many children go to a school that actually looks 90% like 100 years ago. And this is all our responsibility to change this. So take the example of Felipe. He lives in an Amazonas village, 78 people, only 20 families. Felipe and a fellow student are the only two attending grade 11 in 2015. Now, the Amazonas is around 4.5 times the size of Germany. It's full of, you know, jungles and rivers. And 10 years ago, or a few years ago, Felipe and the fellow student would have had only two choices. One, move to Manaus, which you have to know is like days, weeks, and for certain community, months by boat away, or stop studying altogether, which most of them did. So now Brazil passed a law in 2009, making secondary education an a right for every Brazilian and an obligation for every state to implement. So now if you're Minister of Education in the Amazonas, what are you going to do? You know that it's impossible to have secondary schools all over these communities. It's, even if you found the teachers, probably will be impossible for them to move. And so, kind of faced with an impossible task, they developed a lot of creativity and innovation. And they didn't say, okay, let's give them only access, give them the worst school you can give or good enough. No, the idea was, how can we be creative to give, you know, access, but with a high quality? And they developed the media center solution. And this works that way. You have in Manaus, in the capital, a media center with content teachers. These content teachers are the best in their different subjects. And there are not many of them. There are around 60 of them. And they work with over 2,200 tutoring teachers, who are kind of coaches, who work with classrooms of 5 to 15 pupils and offer learning and development and take care of that. And both teachers work together to kind of customize the curriculum, to link it to the context. Some parents who were afraid to send their children to school because they felt like they will lose the cultural, Aborigine, whatever connection, doesn't happen because that tutoring teacher really works with the community at the community level. And we know technology is not perfect, but you know, this content teacher, first of all, it's live streamed, yeah? And use the media center also to use graphics and videos, so they have other opportunities also kind of to teach. And what happened is that Felipe is today around like 345,000 students who got access to quality education, which they wouldn't have had before. And the other, if you want to call it unintended consequence, is that this example shows two things. First of all, some of these content teachers became star teachers. Some of them run for office. They helped increase the reputation of the profession. So more and more students want to become teachers, which is what we want. And the other thing, it shows that technology, you know, this fake discussion of, you know, technology versus teachers, it shows that when you combine the technology with the human side of, you know, attending almost individually to every student, This is kind of the key, that technology is central to learning and not an add-on. And for me, this in one example summarizes almost the whole innovation around the Learning Generation Report, how you can have inclusion and excellence. It's innovation through technology, is a different workforce. Imagine we would use this more. In many countries, we don't have enough teachers. I think many could learn from this. You pay these content teachers better salaries. You can, pay them even higher than doctors or whatever, or bankers, or 60 of them. You can really, and then you have a lot of tutoring teachers who would be like nurses or medical assistants, and let's say in the health sector. The workforce in education is not diversified enough. If you want to have excellence, we have to have this paradigm shift. And now we can learn from Finland also, where in primary school, only around half of the people who are working in school in the classrooms are teachers. A lot of them are assistant teachers, etc. So kind of that diversification is I feel amazing. So from such an example that works, you can say, okay, we can give access to people who didn't have access, but already not doing in the old way of building more schools and hiring more teacher only, but of involving in innovation and creating kind of a 21st century education for the child who lives months away by boat trip from the capital Manaus in the Amazonas.
That's a fabulous grounded example of how to solve both problems at once in certain contexts, I think. So thank you for that. We'll come back to some of the policy implications of it. Karen, let me turn to you, to a very different context and history where, as far as I know at any rate, access is not remaining a problem in the United States, but where you do still have huge differentials of education outcomes, a truly, I think, strongly inequitable, socioeconomically speaking country. Would you like to talk a bit about your experience of how these issues, these twin issues, as Amela's pointed out, can perhaps be taken into context? Or are you at the mercy of the overall societal goals and culture that drives everything else?
Okay, thank you. I think what you'll hear in what I'm going to talk about is picking up on themes and examples that both the previous speakers have, and how we have taken that. I'm really going to talk about a school of education that has taken on these issues, and here's our solutions. So I want to first of all say I don't believe that it's equity versus excellence. I believe it's both and so you don't have to make that distinction, but there are, within a context is important. So I will start with that. So that's my personal belief. And then I'm going to give just a little bit about USC and my school, and then give you some examples of things that we have done. So University of Southern California and Ross here, it's a private university. It's one of the top 3 largest private research universities. We have over 46,000 students. We're in Los Angeles. The university was started in 1880, so we have a long period, and the School of Education has been there over, about 100 years as a school. The school itself is ranked 15th in the country in terms of among its 250 competitors, other schools of ed that have doctoral education. We have no undergraduates. We are graduate school only. There are 2,200 students in our school. Half of them are online students. So some of those online students live a mile away. Some of them are on other continents. But that's how we have attempted to achieve our mission. We have 11 degree programs, 4 doctoral programs, and 7 master's programs. And we're very racially diverse. 2/3 of the students, of those 2,200 students, are students of color. We also last year brought in about $20 million in funded research. So we have a research mission in addition to having degree programs. So I want to say that we are a mission-driven school of ed. That is, we look at opportunities and things we might want to do. Because we're private, we can choose the kinds of programs that we want to have. And our mission is to prepare leaders who will improve learning, who will achieve educational equity, and who will improve on educational outcomes through our practice, through our research, and through our influence on policy. And our primary focus is in schools, colleges, and universities in urban settings. So what does that mean? So I want to give 3 examples of how we have played out some initiatives that we think are driven by our mission. And the first is our Master of Arts in Teaching. We have a teacher shortage. We've always had a teacher shortage in the United States. Not that we don't prepare enough teachers every year, but they're not always where we need them. So some of it's geographical. Some of it is we don't prepare enough math and science or special ed teachers. That has been going on for 30 years. Some schools have no problem finding high demand subject specialists, others don't. So we prepare teachers, we do it at the graduate level. But until 10 years ago, our teacher ed program was our smallest program in the school. It was what you might call boutique. We turned out about 50 teachers a year. And we prepared them to work in the schools around LA, in high need schools, schools that had, by and large, students who lived in poverty that were racially diverse. We had one of our advisors come to us and say, this is nice, your mission is to prepare high quality teachers. 50 teachers a year doesn't even address the needs in your neighborhood. So talked about we needed to go to scale. But we had no space. So we partnered with an ed tech company to create an online teacher ed program. So it's online. I can go in. It's a very robust system. We do live classes. We do flipped instruction. These are people who want to be teachers. They already have a baccalaureate degree. They are not currently teachers, and so they do student teaching because we give them a California teaching credential. So we figured out all of that technical way of doing it, and to just tell you, we went to scale. If you looked at the previous 5 years from from about 2002 to 2008, we would have collectively turned out about 250 teachers. Since we started this program, and it'll be 9 years, it's 9 years right now, we have graduated 4,000 new teachers who are diverse. They look like the students in the schools, in public schools in California and definitely around the country. 78% of our graduates are in high need schools and are, for those that have been out there, about the same percentage have been in the classroom, in those classrooms, in those high need schools for 3 years. So we've beat many of the sort of statistics that other schools have had. We believe we prepare really high quality teachers who know how to teach the students that are sitting in those schools. And they're racially diverse. They look like the students that they are teaching. Another thing about students in our school is that 46% of our students are themselves first-generation college graduates. So again, many of them have a sense of what the students who are in their schools had to do to move forward. So that's one example of how we've attempted to pair equity and excellence. The second is we are a research university, and we are a school of ed that engages in research. We have currently 9 research centers within the school, all of them dealing with issues of equity. And I want to just talk about one because I think it is particularly important. It's our Center on Empowered Learning and Development with Technology. And what this center is focusing on is digital equity, particularly for students of color. Not only that they have access to digital learning, but also that they understand social media. They understand, to go back to the plenary session yesterday, Mr. Zakaria about the fact that you need the media, the social media are there, you need to understand the positives and the negatives of that, and it's been particularly often students of color have been left out of that. This center also looks at cyberbullying, which is not only pervasive across for teenagers across racial groups, but is particularly prevalent for students of color. So that's something that we believe we can then look at the equitable use of digital media and effectively. And then the last I want to talk about is we decided that we needed to develop a new version of the comprehensive high school, and that we wanted it to be targeted to low-income, racially diverse students in Los Angeles, who will themselves become probably the first generation of students to graduate from college. So we realized we could not do this within the traditional school. We had worked with schools, and we realized it's very hard to go into an already established school and say, hey, we've got a great idea here of how we're going to like throw away everything you're doing and start over. So we used the charter. We decided we would develop charter schools, and we would be focused on high schools, because many people realize that early childhood education is very important for preparing particularly low-income students. But we keep saying that and saying, so there's really little we can do in high school. Sorry, they should have had, early childhood education. So we believe that everyone can learn, and we believe that we would create high schools that would demonstrate that. So, however, we didn't use developing a comprehensive a new type of high school as our goal. Our goal was to create positive multi-generational change for the students who would be coming to these schools. Our first school opened, USC Hybrid High. It opened in 2011. We bring in students a grade at a time, so we started with 100 students, which was not as many as we wanted. So we started in a deficit in that charter schools are public schools, but the budget is based on the number of students you have in the school. So we nonetheless implemented our model, and our model is based on this: individualized educational plans for each student. And those of you who think about PL 94-142, the significant and comprehensive special ed legislation in the mid-70s, will remember that every special ed student was going to have an individualized educational plan, which was recognition that they had different kinds of needs and there should be a plan for that. That could not come into really effective use until we had the powerful platforms that we have today, until we have learning management systems. So the second part of having an individualized educational plan for every student was the use of a powerful learning management system, system that, and we use Google Chrome. And every student has a Google Chromebook. The third part of it is that we would have high quality, caring, and committed teachers. So students have their Chrome, they have a teacher in each of their classes who creates an individualized plan for that student and that subject matter. But they're still taught by students or by teachers. The third part, or fourth part of that is that we use multiple assessments of what's going on, and we report those out. Students know it. In fact, they're part of the process of deciding what their education is going to be. So they have the ability to, be engaged in what their learning is going to be. A really important part of this is something we call an advisory. Every student has a teacher who becomes their homeroom teacher, and that teacher stays with a group of 25 students for their full 4 years. They meet them twice a day, so that the students develop a strong relationship with with an advisor. And the last part of it is that we get parents involved, because far too often in regular high schools, parents are not as involved. So that's our model. We have 5 schools as of now. The hybrid high, let me just give you 2 quick points of now 6 years in, we've had our first 2 cohorts of students graduate. The first graduating class, they all graduated with what's called A to G requirements. That means they were career and college ready by California standards. All of them got at least 1 acceptance into a 4-year institution, 4-year college. The second, and now they are sophomores this year, and 93% of those students came back for their sophomore year. A really important indicator. And then the second cohort, again, all graduated, all got at least 1 acceptance, and they are now in their freshman year. We are doing a longitudinal study of these first 2 cohorts to understand what is working for them, so that we can feed that back into the schools, into the high schools, so that they can do more of the things that are really helping students. But again, I remind you, our goal is not to have 100% graduation rate in high school, nor is it to have 100% graduation rate of through college. We think those are absolutely important, but the goal is to have each student create positive multi-generational change for them. And they, while that's what we want, they are involved in deciding what does that mean for them. So that you can talk to 9th graders who can sit and say, my great-grandchildren are going to thank me and understand how their lives are immeasurably better because of the choices I've made by being at hybrid high, and and my progress towards that. So that's how we have taken this notion that we need both equitable, which means fair and level the playing field, equitable programs, and that turn out high quality teachers, turn out high quality graduates.
Karen, thank you so much for taking deep into classroom practice and actual outcomes for young people. And you've come full circle, because actually what you've done is bring us back to Jan's definition of equity, which was, I would remind you, young people being able to achieve as she would and could. And so there isn't a fixed notion of what counts as success in all of this, which I think is very critical. Okay, before I hand it over to colleagues in the room, I just want to make a couple of points and ask you to expand on a couple of issues. One is that it seems to me you're all thoroughly agreed that technology is part of the solution here. It's part of the solution for access, but it's also part of the solution to driving up excellence and quality, point 1. 2, you've mentioned, and thank you for bringing it into the room, the notion of preschool education. All the data show that if you really want to overcome socioeconomic disadvantage, investing in preschool education should be a very high priority. Why is it that instead of high investment in preschool kind of going down towards higher education as you can go to scale, it's exactly the reverse? You're in the finance business. Explain to us why that is the case, do you think, in policy terms? And then I'm going to give you another issue that you can come back to, which is the teacher workforce. So I think Amel very interestingly made the point that actually we need not just more teachers, we need a more diverse workforce. And we need a workforce diverse in many senses. One, the kind of jobs that they do, but also the communities that they're drawn from. So I'd like anyone to talk about how it is we tap into that form of diversity and how we enable those teachers to go to the areas of high need. So take whichever of those you like.
I mean, maybe to comment on the progressive universalism is like the technical term for it. It's been really core at what we do at the Learning Generation Report and the research of investing more and more and rather early. Now I'm going to say something that may upset a lot of people who work in tertiary education or
Good, go for it.
Go for it. So, I believe deeply we need so many paradigm shifts, and we have so many. Maybe my advantage is I don't come from education, and so when Gordon Brown invited me, I looked at it really kind of from an outside, hopefully fresh perspective. When I see today that we had Udacity founder here, but there are others. When I see that young people can go through a 6-month or in France we had École 42 or 2-year program. without having to show that they had the bac or A-level or whatever you call it in your country, but without having a degree actually at the end. And then because these programs are made and designed with employers, they have same entry salaries as after having spent 4 years in Stanford, for example, or wherever. Then I ask myself, shouldn't we look deeper into this? If we invest more in preschool, if we invest more in, obviously literacy and numeracy are important, but critical thinking and problem solving, maybe we don't need a bac anymore. And I know that in France they're started talking, it's a big taboo, you know? Maybe, I see my daughter, she's 13, she's programmed her 2 first apps, and she has like a production company for videos, you know? And I think like, yes, I come from an aspiring lower middle class in Tunisia, and for my parents it was always important that I go and study and do a doctorate and all these things. But yeah, maybe at 16 should be ready to go through 6-month Udacity and you know, program things, and being dyslexic and rather introverted, maybe that would fit her life anyway better. Okay. So, but I think from as a policymaker, why should I spend so much? And we have this problem in Tunisia. We have probably too many tertiary education. So we don't have like the access, and we have too many young people all over the Arab world basically who come out and don't find jobs. And we even defy statistics in this region. Since we are in this region, we have to talk about it, is that normally for every more year of education, your salary increases kind of around for a few percent. MENA, Middle East, North Africa, is the region that defies those statistics, because with every more year of education, you rather have less salary, because like the job market and the skills that you gain are not connected. So what about not having a bac or A-level? What about having very few people going into higher education with, let's say, more research and thing, and more people going into fast track, you know, kind of skills, 21st century skills for doing things that would cost me as a government much less. It will give more hope, will give you people, you know, they can be 17 and work already. I don't know, like, and we have these examples. At the moment, they're just the geniuses. But the question for me, if we invest early, very early, rather, and then towards the end leave more openness and more creativity for people to go different you know, paths in their life, then I could imagine achieving a lot. But for that, we have to, I don't know, we need a new generation of policymaker, I guess.
We do indeed. Paradigm shift for you to interrogate shortly. The issue of teacher workforce education workforce diversity. You can avoid the challenge to higher education if you like at this point.
No, I think, you know, being a dean of education, you have to have a very thick skin, because certainly policymakers think we are the reason that they're bad teachers. So, and, you know, yeah, there are very bad schools of ed. So I want to go back to something you said about maybe we don't need to go to college. I would agree, you can have a good life, but for the kids we're working with, they need to have the ability to make that choice. So, because oftentimes, particularly in the US, when I hear people telling me, you don't need to go to college, that is what they're saying to other people's kids. That's not what they're saying to their own kids. So, you know, other people's kids, the ones that are in most of the public schools in the United States, need to be prepared so they can make that choice. And that's so, and they need to have teachers. I think technology is a way that we can do a lot, that we don't have to have physical space, that, you know, as we did with our MAT, but you still have to have teachers. We know from research that they are the single biggest in-school influence on learning. So we need to do a better job of what that means. And also that they also know how to use technology. Because maybe we don't need as many, but they need to understand how kids learn. They need to understand their subject matter deeply, and they need to know assessments so they can look to see what I think is working, is it really working? And the last is, I think that, you know, we are in a paradigm shift. I think how we're preparing to be a teacher, there is always going to be a need for teachers. What I worry about is the expedient thing that right now, as I said, the United States still needs teachers. policymakers have decided that all you need is a baccalaureate degree, and you can go in the classroom and anyone can teach. We've done that before, and as a matter of fact, just because you are an avid reader does not mean you know how to teach a 6-year-old who doesn't live in a house that has books. They need to know how to teach reading. So it's balancing the need for more teachers with the need for what kind of teachers they are, that they're well prepared, and that they look like the students that are in their classrooms.
That last point being really important. Thank you. Well, let's open it up to the floor now before coming back finally to the panelists' last word.
Thank you all very much for sharing your observations. I think extremely interesting. I have one small comment and a question, if you would allow me, very quickly on the Udacity thing, because I was very inspired. What I see is that actually it already assumes a certain level of comprehension that could only be achieved by having a good education, a degree in how to build a self-driving car or artificial intelligence or all those things. That can only be picked up on by someone who has learned to learn, and I think that was something beautiful, and I think that will remain in having a good education. But I'm sure that you assume the same. That's what I was missing. Like, it's not a self-igniting university that everyone will go to. It's not a scarcity thing. It's more. It comes from affluence of having a good education. That's what I feel. The second question I have as a technology builder in education, I just wanted your take on, because technology has many forms and shapes. One of them is being kind of an add-on and an aid. So you mentioned the scalability of certifying teachers and having that effect. Another angle to look at the education is the disruptive angle, virtual reality, augmented reality, all those things. Within your perspective, do you when you speak about technology and the technology helps, what do you think of such technology? Could you speak to that? That would be my question.
Thank you. And the second one right in front.
Thank you. I'm concerned that this emphasis on employability is misleading a little bit, because right now, I'm not sure what time horizon are we talking about, but what helps employability right now may not be the same in a few years from now when artificial intelligence kicks in. What we really need to do is to prepare people who are able to deal with changes, that happen in the future. For that, it's impossible to just give people some skills, immediate skills, and let them out. What we need to create instead is a lifelong, I don't know, is it possible to somehow integrate learning with working as the future alternative to just a school system, but not to leave it, like this is it, you have employability skills, go out there and that's it. Thank you very much.
Thank you. So, Jan, would you like the first shot, since you haven't had a chance to talk for a bit? Either one of those?
The comments is for yours, but just yeah. Okay. For technology, actually, in spite of all the fever about the information technology and artificial intelligence, I'm not a fan myself of the information technology. If I count the time I spend on my work using the information technology is my laptop. And I spend probably, say, like, if I work 8 hours per day, I'll use the computer. And then another role of mine is I'm the mother of a boy of 12 years old. And in his school, like in many schools in China, the teachers, the school, limit the students' use of the cell phone and computer and even TV. So the reason is, when he went to primary school, they have the teacher, the school said that the TV is a machine that produce the idiots in large numbers. So they limit the children to watch TV 20 minutes a day. And then for cell phones, now he's in the high school, middle school. they were not allowed to use the cell phone in schools to stop them from the contamination by all kinds of things that should stay away from in the world of the internet. And then to me, I believe that, agree with you, many things we can achieve by information technology and by artificial intelligence, but many cannot, especially when it comes to the very sophisticated level. And that much more rely on the human mind, human heart, and emotions and motivations that cannot be created by the artificial intelligence or information technology. So I believe that technology helps. It can enhance our capacity in terms of learning or education, but it's not the omnipotent, it's not the panacea. Well, it's really up to a person's preference or interest or capacity to what extent they would use the information technology. As many people in this room, I'm not very good at technology, but I believe I can do many things well, and like many people else. But I don't think there is good reason for us to force them or us to apply the information technology.
Thank you. So
just on the reaction, maybe on
please,
that.
please do,
Maybe
yeah.
what I said was misleading, because I deeply believe every child should have amazing preschool, as early as possible. So my assumption on keeping it open and maybe not going to college, etc., is with the assumption that every child has an amazing preschool experience, has an amazing primary school, and amazing lower secondary experience. We teach them numeracy and literacy, because if you want to critically think, you have to be able to read. Yeah, let's don't forget that today maybe 500 million children are not even able to read. So you have to be able to read to critically think about something. So, and critical thinking and problem solving. And I give an example maybe from Germany. I lived for almost 20 years in Germany. And in Germany, you have amazing universities, like super well funded, etc. But when you have a child, and for free. But when you have a child, and I had my first child in Germany, and you want to have quality child care, let's say starting 8 months, 1 year, or 2 years, you have to spend up to 1,000 euros a month. And so what makes actually Germany one of the countries that's so developed, it's still like the predictability to study is still so much linked to if your parents studied or not and what your socioeconomic background is. So by the time that no one can afford that type of childcare, of high quality childcare. So then you're 7 or 6.5 by the time you're in primary, and then you lose with every year. So for me, the assumption is high quality. I take all that money from up, sorry to say so, put it down, give every child from every socioeconomic factor amazing kindergarten, amazing primary school, amazing lower secondary school. And then they can make the choice which path they want to go, and maybe with scholarship or whatever, support others to do colleges that they wouldn't be able to do so, etc. But I feel that shifting of that money down, and in many African countries and other countries, we just spend too much in tertiary and too little early, and that actually is increasing inequality year by year by year.
Amel, thank you very much. Do you, Karen, want to take on the over-focus on the employability question and what we should really be focusing on?
Well, yes, I could do that. I also want to answer the question about the use of technology. What does that mean? Because I have an example from the first year at Hybrid High School. We had 100 students. When they came in, we did diagnostic, and we had one math teacher, and of those 100 kids, we had 11 different levels of math. So in a regular school, what you would do is they're 9th grade, they're supposed to be taking algebra. You have 100, you divide them by 5. Every teacher gets, maybe maybe it's a diverse group or maybe not. But like 90% of our students would not have been able to do algebra. So we had to think about how are we going to take one teacher and get every student up to the knowledge and skills to be able to do algebra, because you have to do that, and it's a gateway subject. So when you look at what you have, what the students are like, and what you need to do to differentiate and help them be successful, it has to be technology. We couldn't go hire enough teachers. We had one teacher. So if you think of technology in terms of, and I'm talking about, having the curriculum you can get, putting, individualizing it, but technology is going to help us do that. I agree about, I absolutely believe early childhood education is absolutely important. Our point, however, was that far too many students were getting to ninth grade and they hadn't had early childhood, and we just kept saying, sorry, you know. Yeah, so that's why I'm saying while we're getting to, and I will tell you, I think it's going to be a very long haul in the United States because we have 50 systems. Every state is in charge of K-12 education. What we're getting there, but while we're getting there, we have to use technology. And I actually believe that I think we should use cell phones. I think teachers ought to understand how to use those, because saying you can't have a cell phone is like telling kids you can't chew gum. You're going to be spending your time monitoring a rule you've just. So I know that teachers who know how to use apps and other things that are in can use that. So I mean, I have a different take. It's not everyone who can do it, but I think we should use all that we can to take the kids in the school where they are and get them to where we need them to be.
Okay, if you don't want to take the employability point, I'm going to come back to you.
It just, this is not argument, but about the cell phones, the students are not encouraged to use cell phones in the schools, as I mentioned, because, as I said, distract them away from the learning, attention away from learning. Also, this is my personal belief that the world is big. When our child can go out to nature and the world to enjoy the life, why should they stay and focus on the artificial virtual world within such a tiny screen? So I would like my child and kids to go out to the nature, to be interact with real people in the world. I believe that's the real learning, that's the real life.
So since none of the panel want to take on the... let me have it. Let me have a go. Okay. Please, you're the panel member.
No, I answered it because in a way it's like when you have children with high quality education who can critically think and who can problem solve and etc., obviously then they will choose the path which is relevant then in 10 years or in 50 years or in 30 years. I gave the Udacity example for now, for today. You know, if someone decides today to want to be a programmer or whatever designer, that they can go that path. But obviously, but also having too many students who study and who don't have a job, which is the case in my country and a lot in this region, isn't helping no one. So the question is, the skill gap is a huge issue, but you have to answer that question every year and every year and every year, and what that skill gap is and what skills do you need.
So I wanted to add simply a plug, which is that the WISE book, which my colleagues and I wrote 3 years ago, called Learning a Living, addressed precisely that point. It can't all be about skills matching. Things are moving too fast. It's impossible to get the skills maps right. You're doing kids down, assuming what the future's going to look like. So I think what we tried to do in Learning a Living was take 15 case studies from around the world of organizations who are doing just that. Now, before we finish, I'm going to invite our panelists to give us one sentence, only one sentence, because we're nearly out of time, on a key policy recommendation, which from your point of view would be a massive... So let me take for granted preschool. I think we're all agreed on that, actually. We would reinvest, de-invest in upper levels, and we would deeply invest in early years. But if you could choose one policy recommendation for your context, again, acknowledging that they are very different, that you think would drive these twin objectives of both equity without sacrificing excellence, what would it be? Who's first?
Okay, I think it would be that we ought to do our instructional practices based on evidence, so that we need to invest in multiple measures, some that are short term, some that are that we need to invest in assessing what it is we've done, what impact it has had on the students, and that we base the next lessons or their next thing on the evidence about what's working.
Right. Good Lord, what an idea. Evidence-driven policy. Are you mad?
I would agree. For me, is financing and managing education based on outcomes, on learning outcomes that a country, an institution, whoever want to achieve, and not based on inputs.
Right, so not years in education, not the qualifications of the teachers, but the outcomes. Thank you. Jan.
Yeah, I realized that I should be the first to speak because they have already said what I, in my mind.
Bad move.
But anyhow, on top of that, if I can say something is, it really depends on who you are going to give that policy recommendation. I think across many countries in the world, the departmentalism exists. Well, we have so many nice ideas and policies, but Ministry of Education do one thing, Ministry of Human Resources and Social Security do another. But to achieve our goal of the education and employability, we do need them to work together. So if I can give policy recommendations to, if it's not the Ministry of Education or Ministry of Human Resources, I know in many countries, they have several ministries responsible for basic education, higher education, and TVET. But in real life, they are integrated with each other. Is that we could have some coordinated policies for them to do research, as you mentioned, evidence-based research, and then the coordinated financing policies that really could help our children and schools to achieve 21st century competencies, etc.
Indeed, and early years is quite often hived off to kind of health and somewhere in the nether regions. So a plea there for joined-up government. Taken together, that wouldn't do badly, would it, really? Colleagues, thank you very much indeed for attending. Thank our panel.